Yo, it's Tucker Perry here. I thought today I would talk about my latest single, Operator, which came out about a week ago, and take you through the Ableton Live session and talk a little bit about the production process behind the song and how it came to be. So the first kind of sound, and this is kind of constant through most of the song, is this sample loop that I chopped up and kind of created a new rhythm out of. So you see here, I've just got like a Ableton Simpler, and it's just like a splice loop. If I pull up the sample and play it on its own, it sounds like this. It's mainly living on two different pads, and I'm just kind of chopping into and syncopating the rhythm of the loop a little bit. And then further to that, if I go into the automation view, you'll kind of see that there are these pitch envelopes that I'm automating in. Kind of every time I hit the note, is it going to start higher than the original pitch and kind of and do like a little pitch dive. You can hear it here. So let's talk about the drums. So if I solo the drum breaks, you'll kind of hear that, yes, it is doing the kick and the snare, but there's also these in-between notes that are doing like little claves and hi-hats. Right, and so on its own, doesn't really have much strength, but when you combine it with all the kicks and the snares, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Jumping down, we've got like a bass guitar that I played in. As far as the effect chain goes, there's like a radiator from Soundtoys, and then like basic compression, whatnot. Other than that, there's just like a basic Serum saw kind of brassy pad that I've got. And then I've got this, which is my favorite chorus plugins, the UAD Brigade Chorus. Without it, sounds like this. Right, so it still sounds good, but it's a little bit more like vanilla and plain. As soon as I turn it on, I want to go back to the end of the verse and talk about this kids shout, kind of kids chant choir that comes in and out through the whole song. Right, so what is going on here? So we've got all these vocal layers, which is actually me. I just kind of shouted this into the mic. And then I actually just took it and pitch shifted it up like an octave with the Complex Pro algorithm in Ableton Live. And then it was just a case of messing around with the formant and the envelope control. Let's have a listen to the chorus, and I'll kind of go through and talk about some bits and pieces that are happening in here. So. I guess the main groove of the drums stay pretty consistent. You know, there's a few new things that come in this section, like a trap hat, right? And then there's these kind of two extra kick and snare channels. So a lot of times what I'll do is, if I've got like my drum bus set up and it's sounding good, but I want that extra punch, so I'll actually, you know, sometimes even duplicate the kick inside the bus and then have it also living outside the bus. And so now, you know, when I adjust the volume of the kick or the snare, these ones outside of the bus, they're not feeding into any sort of compression, they're not feeding into any sort of saturation, and so I'm just playing with the volume rather than the dynamics of the sound. Let's go check out the sample chop that I was talking about earlier. So we've still got it in here, it's still here. It's still here, except all I did was pretty much just take this whole loop, freeze it, flatten it to audio, put it up an octave, and just whack it on this track right underneath. Right, so the reason why is just because it just gives that sample a little bit extra clarity or a little bit more presence in the mix, especially in the chorus where all these other elements have entered the mix. I just wanted to make sure that that sample is still audible. And if I pull up the signal chain for the sample bus, you'll see I've got this smooth operator here again. You often do get like resonances building up, so I'll use this on a lot of like vinyl samples, especially where it might not be like the most technically perfect recording. That's kind of like cutting into around the somewhere between 200 and 500 hertz. If I just turn it off for a sec, maybe you guys can hear the difference. Those mid highs kind of push forward, and that cloudiness in the low mids sort of dissipates. So here's the guitars. This is THU. It's probably one of my favorite amp sims from Overloud. It's just like a basic like Fender amp sim with a bit of like a Boss chorus effect on it. And then there's kind of just these like little guitar funky melodic things lurking underneath. These are super low. These are super subtle in the mix. One thing I forgot to mention is kind of what I've got in terms of master bus effects. If I pull up this audio effect rack that I have living on my master bus, you'll kind of see that there's all these weird curves. If I play it here, you'll kind of hear what's happening. So hear how it kind of like it becomes a little detuned and washed out for just that one bar before the chorus hits. So that's basically this audio effect rack here, which runs through this plugin. This is the ADA flanger. So I'm just kind of automating, so it just becomes this wet channel for that one bar, or in this case, it's kind of slowly transitioning from being completely dry to completely wet. And this flanger is great because it kind of acts like an analog piece of gear in that depending on how hot the signal being fed into it is, the characteristics of kind of how it interacts with the sound changes completely. So in this case, you'll kind of see that at the front and the end of the audio effect rack, I've got a utility that's padding the volume by 20 decibels. And then at the end, it's boosting it up by 20 decibels. And this is something I do a lot of the time with especially analog modeled plugins, because that gain staging is super important. I might tweak it down to -10, might tweak it down to -20, -30, and kind of find that sweet spot where I'm getting that saturation that I'm looking for. And basically just by having, the same parameter at the end of the chain, just the opposite, so -20 and 20, it means that, what goes in and what goes out, there's no real difference in volume. It's just creating, 20 decibels of extra headroom for this flanger pedal to operate within. I don't know if I should fall for you. Kind of here in the middle, there's a whole bunch of, analog synths that I played in. I've got this Novation Peak here, and then a mini log that I have in storage. This particular melody that plays in this bridge section, I was just noodling around on the mini log and kind of ended up with this sound. So now we're back into the final chorus. I love to always make sure that in any song I'm producing that, the chorus is not a simple copy paste, that there's always some sort of growth or evolving nature happening in the song. And we've got this big 8-bar kind of, outro finale section. I'll just play that for a second. I've once again got that cut out on the automation to bring that flanger in for that one bar. But I've also got is like, if I zoom in on this is the automation for the track on and off of the Kid Shout, right? And you kind of see that that's the downbeat of the final section. I just kind of like notched out like the last, not even a quarter note, like the last 64th. When people used to chop up vinyl or chop up tape, by hand or, by ear, things were never perfect 8 bars, things were never perfect 16 bars. So if you listen to stuff by like Dilla or Nuhabes or even Boards of Canada, you'll kind of hear that like the loops that they made or pulled, like there's always like this kind of imperfection of the crossover point of that loop. So, it might be an 8 bar, but it kind of has this like extra little bit that crosses over into the next repetition, or vice versa, kind of like what's happening here. So that's just kind of my approach of trying to replicate those, imperfections of like cutting your own samples in a digital environment like Ableton, where by default everything is perfect and always in time and locked into, quantization and whatnot. What I was talking about with the kind of the sample cut earlier, you kind of see everything here is like notched out. And that works great for, just raw audio. But some of the other stuff like the synths, just because I cut the MIDI, it's not going to always cut the sound out. So I kind of always go in here and and notch out the automation of the part of the MIDI clip that I've cut out myself. So if I play the drums here, right, boom, boom, boom. So it does 3 bars of like straight kicks, and then on the 4th bar here, it kind of syncopates a little bit. And I've got this side chain on a lot of the instruments that's feeding from the kick. So obviously I adjusted the release time of this compressor so it would kind of reach that normal volume before that next kick triggers it back down, right? I'll play here. But then I was finding that when the kick does that syncopated rhythm, it was a little bit too fast and I was losing that like buzziness coming through. So I just took that release time and automated the release time down on just that 4th cycle of every note, so that just for that bar and that bar and that bar, the signal's gonna come back to its original volume a little bit quicker. Just so you know what I'm talking about, if I pull the release up to something way too high, see, now it's not pumping. It's not pumping, and you can see it on this graph. It's taking that long to come back up to the normal volume. When you're like side chaining with any compressor, also attack, but the release time is extremely important in terms of making that side chain feel right. Then we just got this outro section, and on the released version, I actually ended up cutting that outro in half, but this is the work in progress project as I was working on the track, so a few sections are a little bit more extended. But that's essentially kind of an overview of Operator. If there's anything I haven't touched on, just leave it in the comments and I'll be happy to answer it for you. But otherwise, I think that's essentially, what came to be Operator. So thanks for watching, and until next time.